Now, depending on the order that these VGCember reviews come out, you might remember me saying that Spider-Man for the PS1 is one of my favourite games of all time, because while maybe not the best mechanically, nostalgia-wise, I still absolutely adore the game. But Spider-Man for PS4, I think PS5 and PC is absolutely the Spider-Man game that mechanically ticks all the boxes for me. But before we get into that, let's just go over the story as quick as I possibly can, because it's a pretty nice story that tries to take itself as seriously as it can, while making sure that there's enough opportunities for you to encounter an amazingly large rogues gallery, which I absolutely love. Once again, it ticks all the right boxes by allowing me to meet and fight as many different enemies as I possibly can. After the initial encounter where you put the Kingpin away, you end up in a situation where you find out about Devil's Breath, this bioweapon that could lead to a mass pandemic, well, that certainly aged well, across the entire city, which could lead to hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths. And a whole lot of villains seem to want to get their hands on it. You end up meeting Shocker, who ends up revealing that they're working for someone else, that turning out to be Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative. And the part with Mr. Negative feels like a short game in its own. Like, once you beat Mr. Negative in, admittedly, not an amazing boss fight, you end up feeling like, wow, this was a crazy part. We must be like halfway through the game now. And it's, probably only the first third of the story. The second third kicks in where Otto Octavius ends up beginning to lose control of himself and becomes the evil Doc Ock and causes a prison breakout to happen where you end up fighting the Sinister Six with Vulture, Rhino, Electro, Scorpion, and of course, a rematch with Mr. Negative, and it's just a crazy time. Like, again, the game makes sure to make each fight feel varied. Every time you encounter the different villains, they do everything they can, and there's so much more that I could go into. There's the whole thing with Silver Sable, who gets called in to try and deal with this, who ends up fighting you as well because they deem you to be a threat. And the stuff with the Taskmaster on the sidelines. The fact that Otto turning into Doc Ock means that you end up fighting Otto at the end of the game, spoiler alert. It's all crazy. Like, there's so much that goes on in this game that I feel like at some point I'm gonna have to do a full-length review of this game someday, rather than just the short one I'm doing now. Not only that, but if you get the DLC on the PS4 version, or get the remastered version which comes with the DLC, then you get to fight even more people like Hammerhead. You get to deal with Black Cat, you get to... It's just a great time, really. You get to deal with all of this crazy stuff. Like, this game has so much going on with it that it's hard to recall it all, because I could go on for ages about all the different things you can do in this game. Because that's the other thing as well, of course. On top of all the main stuff, there's the side stuff as well. There's this homeless guy who has his pigeons, and you've got to go and collect them all. You don't have to, of course, but doing that is just a good thing that Spider-Man would do. There's his backpacks that are all over the place. There's these little monuments you can take pictures of. There are these police towers that allow you to hook up the radio station to find more collectibles. And the thing is, it all feels so natural as it happens. You'll be swinging on through, you'll go up to another tower on your way to a mission, deal with that. Suddenly you'll see a backpack is not too far away, you grab the backpack, and now you're even closer to fighting Tombstone, who's another side mission. It all segues so seamlessly. Normally with an open world game, I feel like I really have to go out of my way a lot of the time, but I've 100%ed this game so many times because it just feels so natural to do it along with the rest of the game. There's a fast travel system, but let me tell you, the amount of times I've used that, I could count on one hand because it just feels so good to swing around with Spider-Man. And that's the thing, the gameplay is incredible as well. I was saying about how this mechanically is probably one of the best Spider-Man games, and that's another thing. Web swinging is so good. You get that sensation where the web swinging feels semi-realistic, kind of like in Spider-Man 2, but they've gamified it a bit more so that anyone can really use it, which is great. It just feels so natural, yet because of its simplicity, you're not having to overthink it. The combat is very modern game-ish, but the dodging mechanic with the Spidey sense feels great. Once you start unlocking more gadgets and you start upgrading yourself, you end up feeling like a major powerhouse. Suddenly you're taking out swarms of bad guys with ease like that. Like, this feels so fun to play New Game Plus with. And with the boss fights being all varied, you've got to get good at like several different aspects of using Spider-Man, so it really does feel like it tries to test your skills. Not in a majorly challenging way, I could beat the game on the hardest difficulty, but it can be a fun time. The DLC is a little bit more hit and miss with difficulty. Some of it's way too easy, and there's like one that's way too hard. Like, it's so much harder than the rest of the game and the rest of the DLC. I don't know what happened there, and they seem to course correct with the DLC that came afterwards. That's a bit of a mess, but the overall package is still incredibly strong. And speaking of strong, the graphics and presentation. The game's a few years old now, but it still looks gorgeous. I remember seeing the Tobey Maguire suit for the first time when I was playing it on PS4 back when the game was new, and I was blown away by just how good the suit looked. It looked like how I remember it looking in the movies, and I just couldn't believe that we were at the point now where I could genuinely think that with graphics. Sure, there might be better looking games nowadays, but dang, this still looks great in my opinion. The only part of the game that I'm not really too fond of is stuff like the stealth sections or the parts with Mary Jane and Miles Morales. They're not the worst because there is a bit of tension to trying to distract the guards and sneak past them, but I've never been crazy about stealth, and it ends up killing the pace, whereas I'd much rather just get in and just fight like a swarm of enemies and lay them to waste. But it's also such a small portion of the game that I'm not really too bothered by it. The game has so much going on that I just can't get enough of the game. Like, the only reason that I might have to take a break from playing the game for a couple of years is just because at this point, I've beaten the game so many times in the past few years that it's kind of gotten a bit ridiculous. Like, I think I'm finally starting to really finally scratch that itch with it. Which means now it's time for me to milk Miles Morales for all it's worth, and then eventually when I get a PS5 or when a PC release comes out, then I can start working on Spider-Man 2. But let me tell you, when I was finished with this game for the first time, I was desperate for Spider-Man 2 to come out, because I knew right away that there was something special about this. To me, this might be the greatest Spider-Man game to ever be made. I highly recommend that you give it a try for yourself.